Good morning and welcome to the January 22nd, 2018 workshop with the Orlando City Council. Happy New Year to any of you who have not joined us in council chambers this year. This is actually our first workshop. We had commissioner swearing in ceremony at 10 o'clock at our last meeting, so this is actually our first workshop of the year. We're going to begin. We're going to have two workshops. The second will be a presentation from OUC on the relief efforts they had related to Puerto Rico, but we're going to begin with the issue of homelessness, which has been one of our top priorities as a city and top priorities as a region. Over the last couple of years, we've advanced a different strategy than we had used in the past, and that's a housing first strategy, which breaks the cycle of homelessness by providing permanent supportive housing with an array of tailored supportive services. It's a national model that we borrowed from other cities that have been successful, and we have also been successful. So Lori Harris, our senior advisor on homelessness and social services, will introduce our partners, and we'll hear how we've been doing. Lori?
Good morning. Mayor Dyer and Commissioners, I come before you today 2 years after we have formally adopted Housing First through significant investments that have drastically changed our system of care for those who are homeless. We were once just coping with the issue of homelessness, but now you'll come to find that we are ending homelessness for more people faster than ever before in our community. As Mayor said, Housing First is an approach that quickly and successfully connects individuals and families experiencing homelessness into permanent housing. Your bold leadership through the investment into Housing First paved the way for us to mobilize volunteers to find the homeless, prioritize the homeless based on their vulnerability of dying on the streets, and then bring together housing advocates, agencies, business leaders, and our fellow jurisdictions to simplify that path from homelessness into housing. Today, we will be hearing from 3 of the city's partners who are implementing the Housing First strategies. They will be taking you through the system of care and the results of the system that your leadership created. The familiar faces that we have here today are Bakari Burns, CEO and President of Healthcare Center for the Homeless, who will review the efforts of our Hope Outreach team. We also have with us Martha R., Executive Director of Homeless Service Network, which is our region's designated agency that is the conductor of the collaborative funding and planning approach that helps our community plan and provide resources to address the various needs of our homeless population. HSN's role also includes being the facilitator of our Housing First rental assistance programs. We will round out today's presentation with Shelley Lawton, CEO of the Central Florida Commission on Homelessness. Their role is through research, strategic policy development, collaborative leadership agreement, and high-impact grassroots campaigns, like the cardboard stories that you are familiar with. The Commission informs and inspires our community to act on issues of homelessness. We have a lot of good information to share with you about the Housing First strategy that has happened over the past 2 years with your investment and, again, your bold leadership. So our plan is to go through the presentation with all 3 organizations and then do some questions and some reactions. But please, if there is some specific thoughts or questions that you have through the presentation, our presenters are prepared. Thank you. Kari?
Welcome, Bakari.
All right. Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for your support in caring for our most vulnerable community members. And as Lori mentioned, I have the pleasure of serving our community as the President and CEO of the Healthcare Center for the Homeless. And we provide medical, dental, mental health, and substance abuse services to people who are experiencing homelessness, as well as individuals who are uninsured or underinsured. So this morning, I'd like to talk about the Housing First approach. And our role in the Housing First model is that we have outreach individuals that go out and find individuals who are experiencing homelessness, do an assessment, get them into services that they qualify, as well as we provide case management. So the first thing I'd like to just briefly go over the outreach and engagement process. So our HOPE team, our outreach team, the first step is to find the individuals who are experiencing homelessness down in downtown Orlando. Then once we find them, we do an assessment, and we do this through a vulnerability assessment to prioritize them for housing. And this assessment looks at several different things, but really is focused on how likely will they die out on the streets from being homeless. Once that assessment is done, we navigate them, get them document ready, get them their ID, all the documents that they would need to become housed, and then we get on the registry, a coordinated entry system that our community uses to populate these systems so we can choose the homeless individuals off of registry based on their prioritization. And then housing, permanent supportive housing, because again, the key to this program is getting our most vulnerable individuals off of the streets and into housing, permanent supportive housing. So next I'd like to talk about the City of Orlando investment. Very thankful for the first investment, $200,000 in what we call the Barrier Buster Fund. And this funding was designated to help the individuals who are experiencing homeless overcome any barriers that they may encounter with becoming housed. So it pays for anything such as furniture, utilities, household items, as well as transportation. The next investment was the city has invested in 4 downtown outreach workers. Again, these individuals are on our streets during the day and some in the evening, finding individuals who are experiencing homelessness, doing an assessment, and then getting them referred to services that they qualify for. And these individuals are often referred to as the red shirts. Also, we have some bridge housing. Several years ago, we partnered with City of Orlando to provide a shelter for individuals experiencing or living with infectious tuberculosis. Because we've come so far in the fight against tuberculosis, that shelter is really not occupied at 100%. So what we've done is reallocated some of those beds to provide bridge housing for individuals experiencing homelessness. So what I mean by bridge housing is while we're navigating them, we're able to pull them right off the streets, get them into some bridge housing while we find that permanent solution for them. And then the last recent commitment of $110,000 through the Community Investment Program. And this funding started January 1, again, focused at move-in kits, utilities, and transportation. So let's look at some of the outcomes. Over the last 2 years, there have been 216 individuals housed, chronically homeless individuals housed from our downtown area. Again, over the last 2 years, 216 individuals housed from downtown. We're fortunate that we have a 98% housing retention. And this is key because you can get individuals into housing, but the key is to keep them into housing. Another role that we play is providing the case management and the wraparound services for these individuals who get housed. So again, our case managers are focused on doing whatever needs to be done to keep those individuals housed. Also, we had 143 individuals to participate and take advantage of the Barrier Buster Fund for about an average of $1,300 per individual. And also, we provided about 1,254 bridge housing bed nights. So these are 1,254 nights of individuals staying in the bridge housing, which we believe has saved our system in our community about $37,000 in general. Some challenges. One of the main challenges that we have is the lack of affordable, appropriate housing for these individuals. So that's, as the housing market starts to rebound and has rebounded in our community, finding appropriate, affordable housing is a challenge. The next challenge is availability of low barrier emergency shelter, because again, once we find these individuals, assess them, the best thing for us to do is get them off the streets, either get them into bridge housing or into emergency shelter arrangement. And we have some lack of availability in that area. And then the last one is individuals who are living with seriously mental illness, because individuals who are homeless and have a serious mental illness experience homelessness for a longer time. So again, being able to provide the necessary mental health and substance abuse services for those individuals is a challenge. As we move forward, we've been working with the Orlando Police Department for a better alignment so we can have some support for our outreach team. Also, we're doing some late night outreach activities as well as downtown outreach surges. Emergency shelter referral coordination. We're working closer with our emergency shelters in the effort when we find someone who's highly vulnerable, getting them into emergency shelter. as well as shared housing arrangements. Because of the challenge that we have with appropriate housing for these individuals, we are now looking at different arrangements where we can pair a couple of individuals in one housing unit. And so that completes my description of the Housing First, and I'll turn it over to Martha R.
Thank you all for allowing us to come and talk to you about the good work that is happening with your investment in this process and with your funds and just your support of changing our system as a whole. Bakari's done a good job of telling you kind of on the ground how things work. What this slide shows you is that between the number of chronically homeless folks who've been referred in from during the time period starting in September 2015, which is kind of when this initiative kicked off, that we've referred 954 folks into permanent supportive housing programs. Of those, just under 600 have been accepted into those programs, meaning they met the criteria, they became eligible. And of those, 333 were specifically from city providers. So we're a tri-county continuum of care. We've got resources to serve all three counties, but of those just under 600, more than half of those referrals have come from City of Orlando providers. And of those, 333, 258 have been made it into a referral to a permanent supportive housing program, and of those, 231 have been housed already. So, well, that slide that's not exactly what it looked like. Let's see if I can, the numbers are a little kinked up there. But what that says is that the top numbers there are the number of people who are housed in each funding source, and the bottom number are the numbers who were referred from a city provider. So with the RA, that's the city's rental assistance dollars that you have provided, and there were 36 people who've been housed in that program already, and all 36 of them were referred by a downtown city provider. When you see the Orlando Housing Authority, there have been 12 who've been housed in the Orlando Housing Authority. Only 9 were referred by a city provider, and what that tells you is that you've got other providers who aren't necessarily downtown city providers, but who still work with downtown city folks. So they have a broader geographic coverage, and so it includes downtown Orlando. So sometimes we have people who are downtown homeless people who are being served by other agencies that aren't exclusive downtown agencies or city agencies, but are still referring and working with that population. So overall, in our region, we've placed 549 people into permanent supportive housing, and of those, 231 were referred by city agencies. That doesn't mean that there weren't additional folks who were city folks who were referred by non-city agencies. Does that make sense? Oh, no, wait, we're not doing questions yet. Sorry. Don't ask any questions. That made sense. We're good. All right. So there's that slide. Equally important, I think, for you is where folks go. Oops, out of order. This is the utilization rate that we see for your resources. During the 16-17 year, second half of that, you see that we expended 86% of the community reinvestment funds from the Downtown Business Bureau, Downtown Business District, and then 60% of the rental assistance from the city. During the first half of 17-18, we were projecting 99% and 82%, and then fully expended by the second half. This is because of ramp-up times. The funds came in. We were fortunate that you invested heavily in rental assistance, which was very helpful. The rest of the system had to kind of play catch-up. We also had to engage other resources to make those pieces work, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. What this map shows you is where people actually live. What zip codes are people moving to? So if they've started out in the city, where are they living now, and it shows you that we've got some good diversity around the area and where folks are moving to. So this includes the CRA dollars, your rental assistance dollars, and the housing authority dollars. Context of all that is, as I said before, rental subsidies are one piece of the puzzle, but to make, as Bakari was saying, we have to have the housing units to move people into, and we have to have the case management to wrap around. So we're not going to put somebody into a unit if we don't have the case management to support them. Your subsidy, your rental assistance, was one of the first resources into our system, and we had to then go out and secure the case management resources to match to it before we could start putting people in, and we had to find the housing units. So as with most projects, the first year is kind of a ramp up, and we get going, and we're anticipating full utilization here in the next year. But all of that depends how far we can take with one. What happens is right now we've got more rental assistance than we do case management. At some point, we'll get more case management, and then we'll have more case management and not enough rental assistance. And we're always waiting on the housing. I think the housing is going to be a shortage for several years here. And so I can think of it like a three-legged race, and one leg can get pretty far ahead, but if the others don't catch up, then you still don't get very far very fast. And so we need all three. All three are critical. And our job is, and part of our challenge is, how do we balance them so that we're moving all three of those legs forward at roughly the same speed and maximizing our resources. And so that's what it takes to be able to get folks in. And what you need to know is we're not going to be using your dollars to house people if we don't have the services to make them successful. I also want you to know that your dollars are particularly helpful because they give us a little bit more flexibility than what the federal dollars do that we also administer. And that flexibility is huge in just making it work for some folks and making it work faster for some folks. And many of the landlords that we work with will say that they really, that it's easier for them to work with these resources than some of the other ones that we compare them with. And so your dollars make a big difference in that way, and it's very helpful with some of our trickier clients and some of the harder cases to be able to use your more flexible funds to make things happen. And then this is really, again, just stressing when we get folks in and we move them into these neighborhoods, there's also this idea that we want them to succeed and we want them to build new lives there. And this is just an example. I'm actually stealing Bakari's work. This is an example of some of the activities. This is just a snapshot that when folks move into housing, the wraparound services also include how do we help people develop community in their new environments, which is one of the important things, because it takes a while for folks to leave kind of the friends network that they have and develop new friends and develop new networks. And so there's intentional effort put into how do we help people reestablish connection in their new homes. And this is just one of the ways that not just Bakari's group, but the other providers that we're working with make these kinds of things happen. So we're using your resources, getting folks into housing. They're being housed in a broad variety of neighborhoods, giving us some good diversity, and people are being stabilized in those neighborhoods, and we're excited about that, and we're grateful for your investment in this strategy and for being really the early adopters, getting it going for the region, making it happen. You were strategic, you were pretty bold in making that happen, and we're grateful to you. And now I will turn it over to Ms. Shelley Lawton, awesome director of the
Thank you, Martha,
commission.
and welcome, Shelley.
Good morning. Thank you again for having us here. What we, and I'm batting last here, where I want to wrap up is the importance of your leadership, your continued leadership in helping this community understand this impressive, incredible change that we have just heard my partners talk about and Lori framed so well. In just 2 years, we've made this change, and change leadership is what's going to continue helping us move this forward. When I think about what change leadership looks like, there's really 3 primary phases of getting a community to change. And we've never focused on a social service issue like we have on homelessness, in getting this community to change the way we've done things. There's 3 phases. The first one is you gotta understand what you want to change to. And as you've heard Bakari and Martha talk about, we as a community decided that 2 years ago we were going to change to the Housing First model. And in that first phase, what's required is really good research and development, which you've helped support, investment, and then getting the community to really commit to the change that we've talked about. That's where your leadership has been so incredibly important and vital. Mayor, you and this council have led the way on making sure that the rest of the jurisdictions and the business community, social service agencies, are all working together in this focused change for a new way. Once you decide where you want to go, though, you can't just willy-nilly change the entire system. So the second phase is a pilot, and we'll talk about that more, but again, this is where you showed real leadership of putting up an investment of about $1 million, along with the $6 million from Florida Hospital, to invest in a pilot program that really looked at the housing the very most difficult 100 in our community. And then finally, once you go through a pilot, then you have to figure out how do you extrapolate this out to the entire system of care. So let's talk about, because I'm always asked, how are we doing in really ending or moving the needle on homelessness? And it depends on the population. So as Bakari and Martha told you, we started with chronic because they are the ones most in jeopardy of dying on the streets. And we've finished up through the pilot stage. And if for some of you were there this summer when we talked about the measurements that we achieved in 18 months. And in 18 months, we housed 168 in permanent housing. That means providing them with that intensive case management. And the spillover effect with the rest of the community not in the pilot is they were watching this approach, and we housed over another 550. So in 18 months, we've housed, and you heard Martha's updates, but at this point last summer, over 700 people in 18 months. But that 1,000-person number shows you we've still got a long way to go. What's incredible to me, though, is a couple of these other metrics that haven't been mentioned yet. Florida Hospital's investment was in the belief that we knew how much it was costing us to keep people on the streets. And what we learned in 18 months is Florida Hospital saw a 57% decrease, 57% in these 100 going to the emergency room. Amazing progress in a very short period of time. We also saw a drop in the cost associated with keeping people on the streets down to about $20,000 as opposed to $31,000. We believe that's going to go even further because that first year, there's a lot of people who hadn't been to a doctor in a really long time. So we see some efficiencies there. But like in any pilot, you run into some hiccups. And as you've heard both of our presenters talk about, housing is our #1 hiccup. It is very difficult. And we were case managing people on the streets. So the commission convened the community together and said, what can we ask the community to do in order to solve this issue of housing and a lack of the amount of moving costs we needed? So I'm really, really excited to say we kicked this off again, Mayor, with your support and assistance to ask the community for their help under the Welcome Home Project. And since November 21st, we actually have updated numbers now. We have housed 52 individuals since Friday, and we have raised $109,000 since November 21st to help move in these individuals for their moving costs. This is what you can do when you ask the community for their help, and many of these investors were $10, $20, $50 investors. Moving over to family homelessness, while the significant financial numbers are associated to chronic, Where we see our tsunami in terms of total numbers is in our family homelessness. We've worked with J.P. Morgan Chase to discuss and use some incredible reports that they have done on family homelessness that documents about 7,000 children are in our schools that are by Department of Education definition homeless in our school systems, which means unstably housed. What we have begun to pilot in this region is we've done the research. We know that for families, which is really economically driven, there's two primary issues we need to look at. Rapidly rehousing them, getting them stable, and then getting them a path of training and education where they can stay in their homes. We'll have more to report as that pilot continues, but we're hoping to see some really good results, just like we have with chronic homelessness. The area of our population that we know least about is youth homelessness. And these are children 13 through 24, 13 years old in our community who are unaccompanied. They are living on their streets. They are leaving their homes because of crisis. We've just launched again with our partners the first ever in the nation Tri-County Voices of Youth Count, where for 3 days last fall, in 3 counties, we went out and just like we do with a point-in-time count, went to try and find the number of young people in our community who are living in the streets. Our final report's going to be coming out in February, and the goal of that report is to really help us understand what services this population needs, how connected or disconnected we are, and where we need to go from there. We continue to work very aggressively on advocacy, and for this legislative session, our #1 priority is housing, housing, and housing. We have a regional strategy going forward that really focuses on the full funding of the Sadowski funds to make sure that, again, we really have the kind of funding we need for affordable housing in this region. And then, again, our continued effort to educate and inform our community that this works. Housing first works, and it's really important. The last project I just want to bring to your attention is a pilot that we have done with your city in downtown Orlando on a volunteer program to extend the great work of those 4 unbelievable HOPE team members who are out on our streets every day. We've pulled together 11 different organizations and have had 200 volunteers since last spring going out with the HOPE team to interact with our people experiencing homelessness in downtown Orlando and making sure we get them connected to the services we need. And finally, we're really having great results with a Downtown Business Council we've put together in partnership with the Downtown Development Board and the Downtown Orlando Partnership. And one of our major focuses going forward is an education on the differentiations needed between those who panhandle and those who are in fact homeless, and how to make sure we have a strong education outreach for our residents and our visitors to downtown Orlando. Thanks very much again. I so appreciate your leadership and the vision that you've shown from the very beginning.
So Mayor and City Council members, you see a lot of numbers before you, and I know they can get confusing, but it's very clear from those numbers that you'll see that homelessness has no boundaries. They move in and out of our community for services. They move out of our community to seek permanent housing. And one thing I want to make sure that you also understand is that the numbers that were introduced today were focused on your rental assistance dollars. We are housing individuals and families with other dollars that aren't from the city, from HUD, which is ran through HSN also, through Shelter Plus Care with Orange County. And so there are more numbers that can be added to this, but the numbers that were presented to you today were those that were focused on the rental assistance that you provided. And so again, it's because of that strategic investment and bold vision that our community came together. And I think what we realized is that we could do better. and we have done better. But the path is long. This is not just a magic wand, one and done, and we've ended homelessness. Homelessness is a complex issue before us. We live in a nation that is struggling all around issues of affordable housing. And I know all of you are thinking through that very thoughtfully. We have leaders and staff here that are thinking through that, but I can tell you that that is the sticking point for our agencies to continue the successful path that they're on. So if I could ask you to do anything, is to take some time to be thoughtful about how we can create more affordable housing units from the United Way Alice report that came out, I believe, 2 years ago. We were already at a 95,000 affordable housing unit deficit in the Tri-County area. And that doesn't just impact our homeless population, that impacts our workforce housing. And so again, I appreciate your bold leadership. We know that you'll continue in that same path. But we're open to questions, thoughts, and remarks.
Thank you, Lori, Bakari, Martha, Shelley. So when I ran in 2003, when asked on the campaign trail the most difficult issue I would have to deal with, I answered homelessness. And today, 16 years later, I would respond in the same fashion, but I think that we have moved so far along the continuum since 2003. We had a mayor's task force on homelessness that Commissioner Stewart, who was not a commissioner at that time, was the co-chair of with Terry Delahunty, which the primary recommendation was that we needed to have a regional approach and a regional commission. We then had a interim regional commission, which recommended that we have a permanent commission, and it brought together the community in a more comprehensive fashion than it ever had before. I've never seen an issue that had more silos involved than the issue of homelessness 10, 15 years ago. But now I think everybody knows each other, and there's a lot more of a comprehensive approach, and people knowing what other people are doing and all working on a similar vision. And we've had to make some tough decisions and tough choices that this council has done, because if you're getting people to do things a little bit differently than they have done for the last 2 decades, and you change how you're funding people to get the results that you want, sometimes there's a little pain involved with that. So I appreciate everybody. And, you know, we've had a great approach in this community in terms of bringing everybody to the table and working together on whether it was getting a medical school or Sunrail or downtown venues. And if we have been successful on those, we can't have a full celebration unless we're also successful in helping those who need us the most, and that's the homeless. Okay, with that, questions and comments, I have Commissioner Sheehan and then Commissioner Stewart.
Thank you, Mayor Dyer, and I'd just like to applaud your leadership on this, because this has been a very difficult issue, and you know, it's not one that we always get accolades for, because it's kind of like pouring water in a bucket with a hole. There's always more need, but thank you, because again, it's not something you're going to just solve. And that's one of the things for a politician. You wanted something that you can kind of move on, but you can't with this issue. So I want to thank you for your leadership, because I know it's been a hard issue, and I think you've put together a very good team. And the fascinating thing was, I had a friend who was in town, and he said, "There's this really great speaker coming to Florida. You should talk to him." And he was actually already coming to speak to your group, which was really cool. So yeah, and that was at a national level. So, you know, again, you were really on top of it. And I just had a couple questions, though. So right now, of the almost 1,000 people that are getting referred, to about 25% have made it into the permanent affordable housing. Is that about right?
Before Martha responds, you talked
Okay.
about scooping out, you know, the water as it's coming in. That's something that we neglected to share, but as one individual comes into our system, we are housing 3 out of the homeless system. Is that correct, Martha?
Yeah, right now.
Come back up to the mic if you would.
The reports that we were able to run most recently have been pretty consistently showing that for every person who comes into our region who's gets identified as meeting the definition of chronically homeless, these long-term disabled people, for each new chronically homeless person we identify, we've moved 3 into permanent housing. And so we're on a good trajectory.
Okay.
We got a lot of backlog.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
and there still is always going to be people moving in. But we've got, there have been 1,000 referred into the system, and of those 231 of those are city folks who've been housed. There have been additional folks who've been housed. So out of the roughly 1,000 referred into the system that looked like they were eligible for the program, about 600 of them are from the city, and of those, 231 have already been housed.
So there's more outside the city that have been.
Because we're tri-county.
Right,
Yeah.
I
And
got
so
you.
some of our resources move across the whole three.
It's not a criticism, I'm just
No,
curious as to how much
yeah,
need
absolutely.
that
Martha,
you're
are you
identifying
able
it.
to speak to the number of veterans that were housed as
Wow,
well?
yeah.
Because that's a very large number that it isn't accounted for in the numbers we've been talking about.
I don't have that with me. Can certainly find that out. The Veterans Administration does some of that housing on their own, and they do not use the same, tracking system. But we've got a lot of those in our system. I'll be glad to get that to you.
But that's another area where we were able to declare victory. that
We have
every-
made amazing progress in that, and that we have been identified as having effectively ended chronic homelessness among veterans, meaning that when we identify a chronically homeless veteran, if they're willing, then we are able to get them into housing within 30 days on average. And so that's what that term means. So yes, we've made amazing progress with the chronically homeless veterans.
And I had another question, Mayor, if I
Sure,
can.
Commissioner.
On HUD, the narrow definition of flexibility with the city money, could you elaborate on that just a little bit? What's the difference between?
Well, I mean,
The
you
HUD
guys have a few regulations.
Well, yeah.
Y'all got yours, and then HUD has theirs.
Right, okay.
And so it's just, we can make things happen faster sometimes without quite as many checkbox and quite as much repetition and things like that. And we have a little bit more flexibility. With HUD, nobody's eligible unless they've been homeless, unless we can document their homelessness for 12 months, and we have to have this many literal documentations in the HMIS system, whereas with you guys, we can know they've been homeless for 5 years. We can have, maybe a little less documentation, but everybody knows, and we've got enough documentation to show. And so it's just things like that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we create an incentive fund for landlords where we pay them some money up front if they'll take somebody, and then some more
Yes.
money after 6 months of housing, and that's not something that you'd have been able to use HUD money to do.
Okay.
That's right, absolutely. And that kind of kicked off when we got to get our stuff in early, and so that kind of, we hadn't made any payments on that at the time that we submitted this report. But yeah, your $500 when people sign on, and $500 when, $500 at lease up, and $500 when somebody maintains their tenancy for 6 months. As an incentive. We did that just to make sure, instead of getting them all the money up front, just make sure somebody didn't get the incentive and then a week later evict the client. So making sure they're actually staying in the unit. But that's to help incentivize landlords, because again, we have a lot to offer landlords between the incentive funds, the stellar case management that comes along with folks. We're aware, what we're saying to landlords, if you're going to rent to a low-income person, we've got a sweet package here. To hopefully help you choose to rent to one of our folks whenever possible. And so that's making a difference in getting folks housed.
And then one more, Mayor. On the Sadowski funds, that's something that's really been a frustration for me as a local elected official, because that money is supposed to be set aside. It's a portion of dock stamps from real estate sales, and it's appropriate for that to be used to house the homeless and people who are, and for affordable housing, because as the real estate market increases, as you're selling more real estate, that was supposed to be set aside. And during the real estate run-up in 2000, and right before the fall in 2009, that fund was very rich in dollars, and it got raided, and it's very frustrating. And I think that one of the frustrations that I have is local preemption, from the legislature, and then they go do stuff like this that negatively impacts our ability to actually help people. I wish they'd be less concerned with, our travel dollars and stupid things like that they freak out about, and worry about things like this that really impact Floridians, and stop raiding these funds, because it's so necessary for people. And I'm glad that you all are concentrating on that. And I'm wondering, is this something that, and Commissioner Ortiz, is this something that we're working on with the Florida League in terms of, and I don't mean to cross, but I know that Commissioner Ortiz is very involved with these issues, but this is something that's very, very important.
Is actively going, yes,
Good,
for the Florida League of Cities, yes.
I think if you would look at the data of when the affordable housing deficit started to increase and track when
Right.
the funds were starting to get swapped, they mirror each other. They
Yeah.
reflect each other. So I know that we are advocating, at least from the permanent supportive housing and all affordable housing advocates, around not sweeping the Sadowski Housing Trust funds, and then also with the housing trust funds, actually setting some aside for permanent supportive housing. Supportive housing is a unique type of affordable housing that is needed for a particular population that does exist in our community, and we still don't have that. And so, again, advocating around those two particular areas, one, not sweeping, but also providing us with an opportunity to do specific housing around the population that needs it the most.
And if I could add to
Yeah.
it, there is some optimism right now. There is bipartisan support for not only fully funding, but also not sweeping. So it's the first time ever we've seen this bipartisan support coming out of both the House and the Senate. We do have a couple very specific asks, I don't have it in front of me today, on maybe asking some of our local elected officials to make sure that they're signing on as co-sponsors to a couple of the bills, so I'll be happy to get you that information. But we are starting to see some cautiously optimistic movement. And the other great thing, we have wonderful statewide partners like the Florida Chamber Foundation, who has never before come out in really talking about the full support of Sadowski, and they have signed on. When they've done, Florida Chamber just has gone through this whole new rethinking about prosperity, and it's now one of their number one issues from a policy standpoint. And because when they went out and talked to their constituency across the state, housing was the number one issue in every region of the state of Florida. So it is hugely important from a statewide perspective.
And one more, Mayor, I'm sorry. Part of that, too, is that, and I'm wondering if this is part of it, that there seems to be, and I know this happened in Hampton Park and some of the areas in my district, there's the affordable housing that is available, but then it sunsets out after a period of time, and then it goes market rate, and that's frustrating because you lose that. So you're making that investment, and then one person makes a one-term, gain in terms of the real estate value because their house was subsidized, but then that affordable housing comes off the market, and then we lose those units. So it just seems like that, again, is pouring money in a bucket with a hole instead of, and impact in only helping a few people instead of providing more sustainable, long-term affordable housing that can get people off the street.
I'm only going to reaffirm your statement, Commissioner Sheehan. It's the preservation of the
Right.
affordable housing that needs to be coupled with the creation of affordable housing.
Thank you, Mayor. That's all I had.
Commissioner Stewart?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you all for what you do. It means a lot to me personally in terms of my career, but also means a lot to our city. The challenge of homelessness, as we've said for decades, has been no one person comes into homelessness the same way and no one person leaves the same way. So we have to make sure that we provide a whole variety of alternatives for those that match that. Sadowski Act, I think, is one of those, on the Sadowski Fund, is one of those that's important. I agree with you, Commissioner. I think that the state needs to have some type of revenue stream that will keep it from avoiding to rob these types of things in an effort to have the statewide funding or statewide theme that we're not going to raise taxes. So we're not raise taxes, so we're going to steal from funds that are created,
Right.
and that's inappropriate and bad policy, frankly. I ought to address the issue some other way. I've got 3 or 4 quick questions, and then, Lori, if we can get together afterwards, I've got some other smaller questions I'd like to talk with you. Kari, one of the issues that you've mentioned as your challenges is the challenges of low barrier emergency shelter availability.
Right.
Now, philosophically, we have said in the last 4 or 5 years that housing first is the model. And that has put us in a position of emergency housing and housing first in conflict of trying to raise money. how are we raising money to address emergency shelters if our philosophy has been to raise all the money we can for housing first?
Well, I think, and that's a great question, Commissioner. I think the push was we had to get the community to recognize that we needed to do something differently, because before we were putting all of the resources into the emergency transitional type of housing, which actually had a 25% success rate. So now we wanted to introduce a new concept that would go from a 25% success rate to an 85% success rate. But when we say housing first is something that we need to embrace, we also need to look at how do we continue to support those emergency shelters, as well as some of the transitional type of programs that will help individuals get immediately off the streets and get them prepared for the permanent supportive housing.
So how are we supporting them?
Well,
I mean, how is there funding? I mean, I feel like, although I'm probably not accurate, I feel like that this core of government funding is going towards a housing first model, and we've left the community to stand on its own,
right,
to help address emergency housing.
Right, yeah, because one of the things we have to keep in mind, I'll let Martha come up, but what has been identified from the federal level is they were saying we're going to put a focus on permanent supportive housing. And so when the feds say this is what we know works, this is where we are channeling our federal resources, we as a community have to respond to that. But we also, and what Shelley is doing and others are doing, is to raise awareness for the additional resources for the other parts of the system that needs that support. So I think, again, we were following what the feds were saying. They've seen it happen in other communities as the permanent supportive housing embracing the housing first market.
Hey, Commissioner, sorry, and we'll have Martha come up, but emergency shelters is absolutely a part of the Housing First model. There is no wrong front door, and so emergency shelters are a vital and critical part of Housing First, and the City of Orlando does invest through our ESG dollars and our Community Investment Program dollars into emergency shelter.
Absolutely, and I think a lot of what you're referencing is kind of this community awareness that the federal dollars were being shifted into the Housing First model. And one thing to remember is that those particular federal dollars, that particular pot that we've now shifted to Housing First, emergency shelter was never an eligible activity anyway. We could never have spent those dollars on emergency shelter. We could spend it on transitional housing. And what the federal government said is when they looked at their portfolio and they looked at the data, that there was a disproportionate amount of those dollars being spent on transitional housing, and that a lot of the transitional housing programs were candidly kind of creaming the crop. And so we as nationally, we had developed a system, a homeless services industry that was taking our limited public resources, and using them, targeting them for people who, for the most part, not all, but for the most part, would be able to end their homelessness without that help. And we were not using those dollars on the folks who could not end their homelessness without that help. And that was a strategic policy decision that they wanted to retarget those dollars. But we all know the federal government resources aren't going to do this any more than just the City of Orlando resources can do it. It takes a whole community, buy-in to make this happen. And that is part of the, the wonderful work that the Commission is doing is the public dollars alone are not going to be able to do everything, but there definitely was a refocusing of those resources from the federal level. But you are absolutely right that emergency shelter, and particularly low-demand emergency shelter, which is very tricky to do, is a key aspect, a key part of that continuum that it takes to be successful in the Housing First initiative.
Thank you, Martha. Appreciate it. Another quick question, and I'm just, it's an overall numbers issue. So I think, Shelley, you provided a map of 83 homeless placements, but we've said that we've housed 596. So explain to me what the difference between that is.
The difference with that is that's specific to the next 129. We focused on them to use them in the pilot so that we know so we can track how this pilot is doing. We're the ones that were being case managed on the street, And so we wanted to focus them as the next wave of people getting into those homes.
Back in, was it November?
Back in November
Back in
20
November,
21st.
Commissioner, we kicked off an approach where we made a real effort to try to identify landlords that would help us house. We had 129 people that we had the resources for, we had the case management for, we had everything except the housing. So we wanted to make a real conscious effort to raise the awareness in the community
That's
that we
correct.
needed to house these.
That's correct. And our goal is to try and get that housing by the end of March. Again, to put some energy and commitment to finding landlords who may never have been part of this program before.
I understand all that. I don't know that the information you gave me reflects that. That's my question. Because I'm looking at a sheet that says permanent supportive housing clients from Orlando and housed with city original assistance, and it says 83 households. And then I'm looking at another sheet, part of it that says that we provided 231, and then another one
Yeah.
from Bakari that says we had 216.
So, yeah, so Bakari was talking about his program. What you see, the 231 are the folks from the city, people who were homeless in the city, who were housed between September 15th and December 20th, 2000. So September 2015 and December 20th, 2017. So some of what you've got going here, you've got different numbers, including different
That's what I'm trying to
providers.
understand,
You
yeah.
got different numbers for different time periods and different projects.
Yeah.
And so this 231 are the number of people who were referred by city agencies and have moved into permanent supportive housing So that's a subsection of all permanent housing. So just the ones who've moved into permanent supportive housing between the middle of September 2015 and the middle of December 2017.
I understand. Let's talk afterwards, and
Sure.
the information just doesn't. I mean, the initials, it may be mislabeled in such a way that covers that task. And the last question I want to ask, which has always been a concern of mine, I kind of do it for a living, but a concern of mine is this: Shelley, how are we recouping some of those community costs? One of the issues that we have when we started this process was that we said it was $31,000 to $32,000 per chronic homeless, and now we think that figure's dropped to $21,000, which is great. I mean, don't get me wrong. But a large portion of that $31,000 was incarceration.
Correct.
It has always been a concern of mine that we can keep guys out of the jail system, but we never get a chance to recoup those costs of not having them in the jail system.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't see a grant from the jail system saying, hey, here's $1 million, thank you for not giving us people.
Right.
Because they just fill it with other criminals.
Commissioner, the one good example is Florida Hospital's $6 million.
Oh, no, Florida Hospital is right on point, which is what, we said that,
But you're
15 years
right,
ago.
we haven't.
And I think that's exactly what the commission is working on right now. By February, we're hoping to bring to the executive committee a matrix, because that Florida Hospital grant runs out at the end of this year. So what we are working right now with the Central Florida Foundation is a matrix. We know government can't do this alone. So what are the costs associated with this program? What's missing from that? So maybe it does pull out some of these stats that tell you how many people have reduced incarceration, the hospital, et cetera. We're working on those now so that we can get a community cost, that gap analysis from what government is spending right now to versus what we really need to do to have a full system of care only for chronic homelessness, because that's the only one that we're far enough along in the data. We don't have the data on the other areas.
Well, I'm going back 15 years now, so understand, I'm going by my memory. But at that time, Florida Hospital said they were spending $14 million a year on caring for indigent care.
Right.
If there's a 57% savings, they clearly see a dollar and cent value to continue invest in this,
That's right.
which makes a whole lot of logical sense. And their leadership has been, I think, key leadership to our community. I think Orlando Regional will follow in suit, but I don't think they'll follow in the same volume, but they'll follow in suit. But the report also talks in $17,000 or $18,000 per person per year of our 132 that was in incarceration, arresting, booking, putting them in jail, they're at incarceration. I'm convinced, like you are, that those people are now, that less of those people are being incarcerated. But how are we going to be able to recap that government dollar to help us
Transfer it
move
over.
forward to, say, anti-crime investment or other things that we can do to make sure this same population is not picked up every time we turn around?
Commissioner, I think that's a great conversation to be having. And now that we're getting the data and we can show that there is a true economic impact of these issues, couldn't agree with you more. As Eddie Solar from Florida Hospital says, he now knows this isn't just a philanthropic initiative. This is an economic initiative for him. And I think we need to have the same conversations with our law enforcement and criminal justice system. I think it's a perfect one.
And I agree with you. And one last thing, let me just share this. Lori, thank you for your help on leadership with our police department. And I know that talked to Chief Mina about it. I'd love to have us do a little better job in terms of educating those in our own police department, as mainly for our own sake and for leadership in terms of what we can do in the Orange County Sheriff's Department. As they run across people, having resources and getting information back that moves a little bit faster than what we're currently doing. I know we're at capacity with the people that we have, but we have a situation just recently that we've talked about in which we did a good job, but it required a couple of key people to make phone calls, and it seems to me it ought to run faster and cleaner because those people, they're on the street and are camping out in our cities, need better help and need faster help.
Affirming what you said, Commissioner Stewart, and we do need to refine that system. And I think it's just, our CIT trained police officers, having them have a better understanding and relationship with our HOPE team, because we're not in the business of displacing anybody who's living in a place that's not meant for human habitation, and we do want to refer them to available resources and giving that timeline. And we've worked, in your district and many of every single one of your districts, we have faced an issue around, a group camping or individuals that needed resources fast. And it is more than just the outreach workers. It is a outreach shelters and law enforcement working together, because we can't police ourselves away or out of the issue of homelessness or camping. It is about making sure that people know where the available resources are, navigating them back to housing, and then making sure our service providers are also working in conjunction with our HOPE team. And I believe the HOPE team now pretty much has on demand where there's available emergency shelter beds, so that they can, I think on a daily basis now, are able to say, okay, I have an individual in front of me, let me look at the shelters that are available, where would you like to go? I'm going to make sure that that bed is saved for you.
Good. I appreciate it, and thank you very much for what you do. I appreciate it. I'm not being critical. I just, unfortunately, I have a little bit of experience, so I want to ask a pointed question, and that's not in the least bit diminish my deep appreciation for what each of you have done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Ortiz.
Do I have any time left?
A little bit.
Not at all. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for each one of you for your own presentation. And I'm very impressed. I'd like to meet with you guys later because I have some ideas that may work. Anyhow, on a side note, I want to make sure that you all know that the Florida League of Cities, under the new president, Mr. Gil Cipher, the super priority is home rule, because we need to straighten that up. And then the priority is transportation, housing and transportation and housing, either way. And there's a big effort going on from the Florida League of Cities to try to lobby Tallahassee, if they listen, for us to get more funding for housing, especially under the crisis that we have been seeing lately, Puerto Rico and everything else going on. A few questions, and let me start with, I heard a lot about downtown. Are these efforts just going downtown or going to, because I've had a great increase of homelessness in my district, and we deal with them. They're at the corners asking for money. They're on our parks sleeping, and I haven't seen anything done about that. So I just want to see what's going on in terms of that particular effort outside of the downtown perimeter.
Absolutely, and that I'm disappointed that we didn't add that to the conversation, because it's not just focused on downtown. When I was when I was joined the city of Orlando, one of the first things I did was just do an assessment of the overall process that we have within the city and our contracts. And we only had 2 outreach workers just for the downtown area because it was funded by the CRA. And we have homeless in all of our districts and across the city of Orlando. As I said, there's no boundaries when it comes to homelessness. So we added 2 additional outreach workers for the entire city. And so they are out there along with all of our agencies who work. Again, there's no wrong door. And so as agencies are working within the system that's being created through HSN, if someone's getting served a meal, someone's getting served emergency rental assistance, and somebody's being served for health care, if they are being entered into what we call the Homeless Management Information System, and there are many agencies in your district, Commissioner Ortiz, that participate in the system, they then enter that homeless person's name into the system, and we're able to track and make sure that they're supported and served, along with helping them to create a path towards housing.
Yes,
and so our dollars also, it's $500,000 a year from CRA for the rental assistance, but it's also $600,000 for city. And so we have served individuals that are outside the downtown
See,
area.
we have a CRA on Semra, and we could probably help too, but that's another subject for a different day. Right, Mayor? Anyhow, so...
Get the county on board, Commissioner.
I know I can do it. Thank you, sir. We talk about the Orlando Police Department alignment. I was a little lost when you said, Mr. Carr, when you said alignment. What's that all about?
Sure. Well, one of the things we know as our outreach workers, oftentimes our hands are tied. We can give information, encourage, but sometimes we need the help of the Orlando Police. One instance would be when we're talking about Baker acting someone. If they're a patient of ours and we see them, we can Baker act them. But if they're not a patient, we don't have that medical relationship with them, we can't do the Baker act. But the police, if they're in jeopardy of hurting themselves or someone else, can initiate that Baker act to get them into service. So that's just one example of how that alignment could go. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Thank
really
you.
more just cooperation, education, and whatever we can do together to work together with the Orlando Police to be more effective and efficient in moving individuals off the streets.
That's the best tool because the police officers are the ones who come in contact most of the time,
Right.
before anybody else.
And we work very closely with them. And we utilize them, and they utilize us. Again, we just think there's an opportunity for us to strengthen that cooperation.
Thank you. Ms. Martha, I had a question for you. Are we working with Mission United for the veterans and for other cases?
Absolutely.
United Way, Mission United, which is a spin-off.
Absolutely, and they are also involved in some of the federal funds that we administer from the VA. We have a subcontract with the United Way, and we partner with those resources, yes.
Okay, great. I had one more question. Tell me more about how we work this thing with the homeless. I know that we house them, and I heard in the presentation where we train them, we try to get them to find jobs and whatnot. But how the whole process go? We go for the critically homeless, and then when we house them, do they get to pay for their housing at all? How that works?
It's a good question. For the chronic homeless, the single disabled homeless, we do work from the highest priority. We do the same thing on the family side, but yeah, those who are the most vulnerable, of greatest need, get them into housing, but they've got wraparound services and they have individualized case management. And so those case managers are working on how do we increase income and supports for these individuals. There are going to be some of these folks who are not going to be able to work, and so they're going to be on disability, and that's their source of income. But many folks who, once they get into housing, especially when they catch the breath a little bit, stabilize a little bit, then they're interested in employment. It's employment is one of the fastest ways to a social network. And so these case managers definitely work with people, whether it's part-time jobs or linking them, to some other kind of resource. And then those individuals also pay a portion of their income towards the rent, which is part of why your dollars are able to assist more people than we might have originally thought, because we've got some of the tenants are paying a portion of their a portion of the rent, which frees up more of those dollars to support additional people.
Can we account for I think it's still too early, but for a success rate at this point in terms of people that have been housed, trained, and have become, have reached that point where they can be on their own? Do we have any of those statistics?
Well, we do have statistics around housing retention. Of the individuals that we've gotten into housing, 98% of them have remained housing for at least a year. So now, as far as the number of those who have gone back to work, we don't capture
Or
that.
rehabilitated in some way or the other?
Right. Yeah. We should be able to capture that number. But what we're monitoring right now is again that housing retention.
And I realize it's too early. I mean, it's just, we still have some things to do, but I was just wondering.
Yeah, and one of the keys to this whole piece is, again, that intensive case management, where we have case managers with caseloads of about 15 to 17, where they're focusing on whatever needs to happen to keep that person housed, but increase their income, and again, increase their self-sufficiency.
Well, thank you so very much. Great presentation. It's great to hear this news.
Commissioner Ortiz, I would add that when we started on this path around housing first, we are housing our most chronically most vulnerable. These are the folks who don't have the bootstraps to pull up, which is the very first kind of population that we're dealing with. But as we're moving through the process of moving past the most vulnerable to just the vulnerable now, they are able to find employment, get trained. The City of Orlando has a great partnership with Goodwill Good Source Staffing, where we actually have hired and have working with us temporary and now moving into permanent positions with Public Works, those who are literally homeless and those who have been recently placed in permanent supportive housing.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you, guys. Great presentation, great update. We need to do this on an annual basis so the commission knows what we've been working on, so thank you. Okay, free to go. I misspoke a little bit about what the OUC presentation was going to be about. I'm sure Clint was sweating it out. What we're actually going to do, and the most recent presentation we had at the OUC board related to the Puerto Rico efforts, but when I had asked OUC to come initially, it was to report on the IRMA efforts that were made on behalf of the city in Central Florida. And I have to say that I think OUC did an outstanding job both in preparation and then response to Hurricane Irma. The hurricane came through Sunday night, and by Friday night, 99% of OUC's customers had power, and they came up in large waves each day. And one of the things we worked with Roseanne and her team on was helping to have people know whether their power was going to come on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, and that was really important to our residents because you make different plans based on, if I'm getting power back tomorrow, that's one thing. If it's going to be 3 days, that's another thing. If it's going to be 2 weeks, that's an entirely different thing. But Clint, who, by the way, congratulations, will be the new general manager at OUC on the 29th?
Yes, sir. On
the 29th. But right now, he's here in his capacity as Vice President of Electric and Water Delivery. So, Clint.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, City Commissioners. We appreciate the opportunity to come over and provide you an update, as the Mayor said, on Hurricane Irma. Certainly that was a very challenging storm. What we know is that every storm is not equal, right? They each come with their unique set of challenges. And this one certainly had significant challenges for us. The size of this storm, the speed of this storm, the direction of this storm. Having a storm start on the south part of the state and go all the way up through the state as it heads through north impacts the entire state. We've never seen the magnitude of a storm impact the entire state as we did on this one. That impacts us from a utility standpoint. It impacts the mutual aid and partnerships we have with other utilities. The bottom line is no one was going to release their resources until they understood the impact it had within their own service territory. So that was a significant impact. I will tell you that the state and local government did a phenomenal job from a communication standpoint of telling people to leave their premise, leave their home, get out of the state, like we've never seen before. And so really kudos to, again, state and local government. That was amazing. And that's the right thing to do, right, from a safety standpoint. However, there's an opportunity that we need to address, and we're working collectively as the utilities with the state. And when the storm goes through and passes, then everybody wants to come home and come back to their residence and see how they fared. Well, the challenge is for the utilities is we're trying to also get mutual aid resources coming from other states to come in at the same time. Creates a bit of a challenge on the road system, and even from a fueling standpoint. Everybody needs fuel. So again, some uniqueness to this with the most amount of citizens that left the state. An additional challenge that we had is as you may recall, Texas was dealing with their own challenge with Hurricane Harvey. And so we said, well, how does that impact the state? Well, that impacts the state because they're dealing with similar challenges that we are, and they're pulling on those same type of resources from a line tech standpoint that we are. Again, as we have to go beyond our own resources and get help from other utilities. So Harvey was out there. Many folks were already out helping Harvey and the folks of Texas. In addition, it impacts materials. They're needing materials to address their issue. So very major storm, actually I think the most costly storm that we've seen impacting Texas. So that was a significant impact. So, as the mayor said, there's lots of planning that goes into this process as we get ready. We're trying to find resources ahead of time. I was on the phone with some of our partners. They did not want to allow their resources to come pre-storm and stage in Orlando. They said, we're just not feeling comfortable about the wind speed and the safety of our crew and our employees. We'll be down as soon as it's clear. So again, yet another challenge. We're here today. We're going to talk to you about the process that we have in place, the logistics that are involved, the extensive amount of logistics. Again, this type of effort goes beyond, from a line tech standpoint, the resources we have. So we're going to talk to you a little bit about how we are able to get those resources in, how do we lodge them, how do we make sure they have clean clothes, how do we feed them, extensive amount of effort. We're talking about the execution of our plan that we're very happy with and pleased with these challenging efforts. What I also want to share with you is you're going to hear from 6 presenters from OUC today. We're really proud of the depth that we have in the organization. You're going to hear from half of the folks that on a day-to-day have responsibility in the operations side and restoration. But you're also going to hear from some folks that's not their day job. And that's also something that we're proud of. In an initiative of this size, it takes a whole lot more than the operations group to make this happen. And you're going to hear from a variety of different presenters today also. And as the mayor hit on too, the communication mechanism is key. Many of us were around in 2004. I will tell you there's been significant growth for OUC in the way we're able to respond. And the expectations for the customers, quite honestly, just continue to get high. And so how do we go about communicating? We think about the communication channels in 2004 versus 2017, significantly different communication channels, and we're going to talk to you about how we leverage them. So I'm really proud of the team. I'm going to really turn it over to them and allow them to give you an overview of our process and the things that we put in place. Again, thank you for the opportunity to serve.
Mayor, Commissioners, thank you.
Morning.
Morning, my name is Joe Riley. My role during the storm was Deputy Incident Commander. OUC utilizes incident command
Hey, Joe,
structure.
pull that mic closer. If you would.
Thanks.
There you go.
OUC utilizes the incident command structure for response to all large complex situations, especially for disaster response. Incident command is a FEMA standard that was originally developed in the 80s by firefighters for interagency support and coordination. It was then adopted by FEMA and then utilized across the board for multi-agency response and support. As you can see today, we have numerous people speaking today. Gina Johnson, she's our Director of Corporate Analytics and Planning, and during the storm handled our cost and budgeting to make sure we didn't lose track of our money being spent for FEMA reimbursement. We have Lisa Kern, who handles our mass care. Keith is our planning section chief. His role as a planning section chief is kind of like the battlefield general, setting our tempo and prioritizing the restoration. We have Lemoyne Adams, who's our operations section chief. His role is to take the field teams, task the field teams directly and execute the battlefield plans as prioritized. And then we have Stephen Calmusa, is our social media lead, and he works with our PIO to ensure we are leveraging our community communication assets and focusing the OEC message to our customers so we all stay on the same sheet of music. Irma's path impacted the entire state. Basically, for us, it was massive storm. It covered the entire state. I said it was over 2 times the size of Hurricane Andrew and moved much slower, allowing for the state to be exposed to storm force winds for a longer period of time. Approximately 2/3 of Floridians were without power, largest recorded storm effort in history. We really taxed our external resources since, as Clint had said, Hurricane Harvey restoration efforts were still ongoing when Hurricane Irma hit. So to get external mutual aid resources was a little more challenging than our normal storm response. And overall, the public power entities restored power faster than our investor-owned utility counterparts. Based on the municipal effort, we restored approximately 50% of our customers 1 day faster than the investor-owned utilities, and we restored 90% of our customers 2 days faster than the IOUs. At the peak outage point for OUC, we had approximately 145,000 or 60% of our customers without power. As you can see, FPL had 90%, Duke was 72%, and we didn't have a value for TECO at the time. From this graph, the restoration performance, you can see FPL actually started experiencing the storm first since it came in from the south, so their territory was impacted before anyone else was. But OUC was faster to deploy power and restore power than our counterparts. We had numerous resources on hand due to our extensive effort by our mutual aid team. And having the materials on hand and the personnel allowed for OUC to get out the gate faster and with more success than our counterparts. But it took a lot of effort getting these resources in place and having the materials and people to do the job. And from there, we'll turn it over to Gina.
Thank you, Joe. Good morning.
Good morning.
As a result of Hurricane Harvey and Irma, as Clint mentioned earlier, having such a devastating impact on all of the state of Florida and out in Texas, resources were stretched, and being able to capitalize on mutual aid agreements and partnerships caused us to have difficulty getting additional staff in. However, due to pre-storm planning and continued efforts after the storm had passed through, we were able to secure additional resources and increased our staff out in the field, getting services back on by 3.5 times. While this was approximately half of what we had brought in to help us through Hurricane Charlie back in 2004, which was a similar type storm, we were able to restore our customers 25% faster. This was due to some system efficiencies, technology enhancements, and our emergency preparedness. For Hurricane Irma, OUC did incur about $24 million. Approximately $20 million of those funds were used to restore our distribution system. FEMA eligible reimbursement for this storm is 100% of emergency-related measures and 75% of all other eligible category costs. In December, we began working with FEMA to diligently recover those costs. OUC also incurred about $1.2 million in damages out at the Stanton Energy Center due to stack issues. Those have since been repaired. At the peak of the storm, our sales were about half of what they normally are. This reduced our September revenues by about $1 million or 4%. The unexpected costs incurred during Hurricane Irma were covered through both OUC's operating cash and some reserves that we had in place. As funds are reimbursed through FEMA, we will restore our reserves. Since the storm, we have not had any other issues that have majorly impacted our customers. At this time, I'll turn it over to Lisa Curran to talk to you about mass care.
Thank you, Gina. I had the privilege of serving as the mass care lead under the logistics section during Hurricane Irma. Under the logistics section are multiple different areas that roll up to it. It includes mutual aid, onboarding, our mass care, which is food, lodging, and laundry, maintenance, fuel, facilities, courier services, and transportation. So prior to the storm that Tuesday, logistics went into full activation mode. Mutual aid was securing hundreds of crews from as far north as Michigan to as far west as Texas, trying to get them here prior to the storm. And at the end of it, across 20 states. We had our onboarding team as the main point of contact. As those crews were coming to Orlando, we wanted to make sure that they had a dedicated point of contact as they came down in case they encountered any problems. As you all know, there was a lot of issues on the road, so we wanted to make sure that they were getting here safely and we knew their ETAs upon arrival. Our lodging and our staging groups were working hand in hand to make sure that we were strategically looking at staging locations as well as hotels in proximity to our Pershing and Gardenia locations. We were able to secure blocks of rooms at our Lee Vista hotels out by the airport, Universal Hotels, and Lake Buena Vista. We utilized large plots of land due to our relationships with T.G. Lee, and as well as the First Baptist Church lot off of John Young Parkway. Those were very important to make sure we could house those trucks that were coming from out of state and making sure that we could securely and safely house them throughout the duration of the storm. Our food crews, our food team actually, was getting everything ready to go, getting non-perishable items to put together snack bags. We were working on meal plans to make sure we had hot food available for the crews when they arrived. And then getting water, Gatorade, pallets of those coming in to make sure they were here on hand, as well as ice. As you all know, it was very hot during the restoration, and ice was imperative to making sure we had that. Transportation, fuel, and inventory was also happening simultaneously. We ended up having a great partnership with Lynx. Because of them, we were able to secure their buses and dedicated drivers in order to transport our crews when they arrived to their staging areas as well as to the hotels. And they also had their drivers here, and they knew the routes every single day that the crews were here. We had diesel tankers and making sure that we had ample amount of fuel to fuel the trucks, as well as our facilities around the clock. Our inventory and warehouse crew, our team made sure they had ample amount of electric distribution items, poles, and equipment ready for when restoration was ready to take place. This right here shows the scale of which the logistics team worked, and it was a 24/7 operation. And I'll quickly go through the workflow. But Mutual Aid was securing those crews around the clock. They were coming in, being onboarded. They were coming in all hours of the night. Sometimes it was 3 in the morning, 5 in the morning. We made sure that there was someone in a bright yellow shirt there to receive them, make sure that they had a hot meal, ample amount of snacks to go back to their hotel. They received a safety briefing to understand our service territory and what was expected, as well as handed their hotel keys. They were already checked in. All they had to do was get to their hotel to have a great night's rest. They also received a laundry bag where they could drop off their dirty laundry every morning, and then when they came in at night for dinner, they had their clean laundry ready to go. We made sure that they had transportation to and from wherever they needed to go as well with our Lynx partnership, and then depending upon the time of day, they were linked up with their OUC lead that would take them out to the field to show them where they would be restoring power to our customers. This right here shows an illustration of the enormity of the behind the scenes and what was happening in our logistics team. We assembled 8,500 snack bags. When I say we had a BJ's warehouse happening at our Pershing location, it was happening. We wanted to make sure that those snack bags are ready to go, because when those crews are out in the field, it is so important that they are well fed, that they have the nutritious food that they need to keep working 12 to 16-hour days. Overall, we had 14,000 pounds of food that we served, and any excess food we made sure to donate to the Homeless Coalition, to Daily Bread, as well as other organizations to make sure that they could partake in that. We washed, not personally me, but we had a laundry service wash over 4,600 pounds of laundry, and that was so important. They had to make sure they came down here with maybe 2 or 3 pairs of clothes. They didn't know how long they were staying, and they didn't know where they were going afterwards. So having clean laundry was something that was really important to them, and they know that they didn't have to worry about that service. We pumped over 70,000 gallons of gas, making sure those trucks were well fueled. Overnight, we would pump that, put together all of the supplies they need, so as soon as they hit the ground, they could go out and restore power to our customers. And our warehouse and distribution group We had over 5,700 distribution inventory items on hand to make sure that they had the poles and the equipment they needed, and they were couriered out to the field as they needed it. At the end of the day, these crews came in hot, hungry, tired, and we knew that if we didn't do our job correctly, that they wouldn't be able to do theirs safely, which was restore power to our customers as quickly as possible. And with that, I'll pass it off to Keith
Let me
Letters.
just say before you leave, Lisa, I had an opportunity to greet some of the linemen and help feed them one night, and I was so impressed with the logistics of the support group, and that aspect of it is totally behind the scenes. The average resident isn't going to know that you're housing and feeding and transporting and planning and doing all that. So that's a great area that I think OUC really excelled in during the course of that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa. Good morning. I'm Keith Mutters. During the incident command structure, I'm the planning section chief. The planning section is responsible for situational awareness, knowing the status of all of our facilities, damage to those facilities, resources that are available, and customer status. Knowing the status of and the situational awareness, we can develop incident action plans. That's done on a daily basis, where we use the priorities of our system restoration with the known outages and put together a plan to guide the resources in the restoration efforts. Also within the planning section is all of the IT and OT supporting systems. And I need to start off saying first, I've been doing this in some way or other in the restoration, prioritization, and coordination for over 30 years. I've been involved in every major storm that OUC has had in that time frame. And this effort as an overall team work was outstanding. I've always been proud to be part of OUC, but never more proud than after the Hurricane Irma experience. It's a good thing that we don't get hurricanes that often. But from a planning perspective, we don't get to practice our systems and people and resources much. And since 2004 to 2017, we had almost 13 years with no major hurricane with major damage. Lots of new OUC employees to incorporate in the process, and new tools and technologies and capabilities. And we can do a lot of that through exercises and tabletops and whiteboard, but you never get the experience out of that practice of the quantity and just massive impact that you see in the real event. So let's go through a few quick highlights here. This very busy graph represents load versus time on our system. The upper line is a load profile of our normal. It looks like a dark green or a black on my screen. The lower load profile line in a bluish color is the actual loads during the Sunday evening to Monday morning time period. So where Gina mentioned that we had lost revenues during that time period, that would be the difference between the loads we normally would have expected down to the loads that we actually saw. Now, this is the load that represents the entire Florida municipal power pool. OUC dispatches the combined loads of OUC, the city of Lakeland, and the FMPA cities. We are the balancing authority and dispatcher for those loads. You can see the very steep drop off in loads, basically from 9 p.m. Sunday night on this to around 10 a.m. on Monday morning. And to go deeper in this, and I'll be glad to go deeper on the side if any of you like, the stacked colored lines are generating units stacked in to cover the load. Generation always has to match load. And it's very difficult. You have to have a very good plan because the load is dropping off so quick, and you have to be able to handle unplanned generation dropping out, that you've got to have a plan, and then the dispatch center executes that plan during the storm. And then you've got to be able to ramp the units back up as the load returns online. Storm hardening is a term that's become more in the public, in the media, with the Florida Public Service Commission and the investor-owned utilities. I received lots of questions of what OUC's storm hardening plan is. And basically our storm hardening plan is, we design it to be storm hardened all the time, at least for the past 40 years. We put in stronger poles, we make more use of concrete poles, and we do more undergrounding than others. Our Orlando system is around 65% underground on a circuit mile basis. And I'll just give a high-level overview here. We had 5 transmission lines trip out, but there was no major structural damage. They simply tripped open, and there were no customers out due to those lines tripping. We at all times had enough generation to cover our customers' needs, and this goes for not only Hurricane Irma, but for every hurricane that we've experienced in the 30 years that I've been here. We've always had sufficient generation and transmission to cover our needs. On the overhead, our structures are not getting blown down. You may have seen the destruction in Puerto Rico. Their stuff was actually physically direct winds blowing stuff down and destroying it. That is not our situation here in Central Florida. Our poles are strong enough. We keep them in good shape through inspection programs. What's damaging our facilities is trees and large branches coming down and just tearing stuff down. That is what our damages come from. The core downtown area here did not go out of power in the 2004 hurricanes or Matthew or Irma, including all of the major hospitals in Orlando. They remained in power. And the underground is not perfect. You can see we had 9 failed cables and 15 failed pad mount transformers. But in the big picture, the numbers, that's pretty small compared to the overhead damage. We made some great improvements in the time frame from the 2004 hurricanes to Matthew and then even Irma. And our primary drivers is always, number one, safety. That is the primary driver. And we made it through this hurricane, and once again, with no major injuries. Speed of restoration. Everyone wants to know when, how fast. Get it done as fast as possible. And then, over time, in more recent years, communicating with the customers has become more and more important. Well, I'd say it's always been important, but the tools haven't been there to really be able to do it. Now we're seeing the capabilities come along with the tools and the communications that we can do it better. ETR is a term we use, estimated time of restoration. To get ETRs and even to prepare the incident action plans for the restoration, I need damage assessment information. So we greatly ramped up the number of personnel we're putting out there assessing damage on the system. Typically, historically, we've had about 22-person teams. We've ramped that up, brought in some outside resources, and had over 50 teams this time. We assessed the entire distribution system within the first 2 days, 48 hours, which would only be about 12 hours of sunshine on each day. And that's across the Orlando and St. Cloud systems, over 400 square miles. And then on ETRs, we have a commitment of get a system-wide ETR within 24 to 48 hours. We actually did it this time in about 30 hours, and that would have been Tuesday around noon time. And then we take the system-wide ETR and then we refine it. With the incident action plans, we come up with a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, based on circuits, and then all the customers on those circuits are assigned an ETR. And then that can be communicated or available to our customers. And then they can make plans on what to do, go stay with friends, family, make other accommodations as needed. Here's another picture of number of customers out. You'll see their reference 144,700 at peak. That was around 10 a.m. Monday morning, and that's when we were out and the winds were down enough, and we had mobilized and were safely on the roads and begun the restoration. The orange line represents the number of circuits or feeders, as we refer to them, that were out at any period of time. So just an overview of our restoration process. The first thing we're doing is a feeder restoration phase, and that lasted for 2 days during Irma. During that, we have a prioritized list of customers, categories 1 through 8. Hospitals are category 1, first on the list. Residential are number 8, lowest on the list. So we're going out in order of priority, restoring feeders, and restoring the maximum number of customers we can in a quick period. If they can't fix something within 15 minutes, they are to isolate it and move on. So the feeder restoration here, you see the orange line goes down to 0 at the end of 2 days, and then we're into 3 days of lateral restoration. During the lateral restoration, we're prioritizing by the damage assessment information and where the most number of customers are out. And as I mentioned before, this restoration was primarily broken poles, wires pulled down, destroyed by trees and branches. Some of the great improvements we've made more recently, the damage assessment software. Back in the old days, we had paper maps. An assessment team would go out and mark on the map, and then at the end of the night, we'd have 20 teams worth of paper maps sitting on a table in the planning incident command center. And we somehow thought we could get through all that and summarize it and total it and actually have something good to use. Well, you can, but it takes longer than a day or two. With the software, each assessment team's got a laptop, they're entering the information, it gets uploaded periodically, it's immediately back, we have it, we can summarize it, totalize it, and make it available to everyone to use. The other technological advancement that helps us be more efficient is AMI meters. Now we can actually communicate 2 ways with meters, and it can greatly help us in the restoration, assigning resources to areas and making sure that we're minimizing windshield time and that we're not going to the same location multiple times. And I want to thank you, and Lemoyne Adams will come up and talk about the operations section.
Thank you.
Morning.
Morning.
During this storm, I was the Deputy Operations Section Chief. And, excuse me, as you've heard, this was a massive storm. And because of the size of the storm and the number of projected foreign crews and damage that we determined, or projected rather, we determined that we would need to operate out of 3 operational centers: our Pershing facility, our Gardenia, and our St. Cloud facility. We also knew we'd have to have 2 staging areas. One was Lee Vista, and the other was the First Baptist Church. And again, because of the size of the storm and the number of foreign crews that we knew we have on our system, we knew that it was going to be really challenging trying to keep track of our crews. As Keith mentioned, safety is first. Safety, safety, safety. In the old days, I was also here back in 2004. In the old days, in our construction command center, we utilized quite simply a whiteboard, and we would write the names of our crews on the whiteboard. We write how many foreign crews were on our system on the board, and as they traveled around our system and completed assignments and moved from one circuit to the next, you can imagine we had to erase that circuit assignment and kind of write down another circuit assignment. So that was then, but our senior team, our VPs and our CEOs, our CEO, they challenged us to be smarter, better, and utilize our technology more, as you've heard already. So we utilized a system called Resources on Demand. And that system essentially took everything that used to be on the whiteboard and it was input into a system. So inside this Resources on Demand software off-the-shelf system, it had the names of all the outside resources. It had their contact information, as I said. It had whether or not they could work on 12 kV, because we have 3 voltages in our system. Could they work on 12 kV or could they only work on 25 kV. It also tracked what circuit they were working on, and as they traversed and moved around the system, we could capture that, and it was there for historical purposes. We also used our Pragma Geo system, which is a geographical map of all of our truck locations. We used our OMS CAD package, which is a computer-aided dispatch system. And we also had our GIS technology working in that room. So all of these tools were there to help us track the movement of our employees as well as our foreign crews in an effort to keep them safe. We also had to decentralize our control and radio communication system from our distribution control center housed at Pershing and out to our individual substations. So all activities within that particular substation had to be coordinated through an OUC crew lead that was physically housed at that substation. At the height of the storm, we had about 12 substations under local control. So the crew lead at that substation was in charge of all activities within that zone, all construction and restoration activities within that zone. No one could come in or out of that zone around that substation without notifying the crew lead at the substation. Also, to give you an idea of how massive this was with respect to resources, 94% of our crews had to be broken down to help lead these foreign crews in their restoration efforts. Keith talked about our safety inspection teams. Our safety inspection teams were also located at the substations to help our crew leaders. And they assisted the crew leaders by going ahead of the crews and identifying down trees, poles that were damaged, and wire down calls. And this helped the crew leader to assign crews to these areas, but only after the information came back, so that by the time the crew was assigned to these areas, the tree crews had already been assigned. They cleared the area, so when the crews were assigned to those locations, they could start working as fast as possible. We also created what's called a pole delivery team, and we took the assessment data from Keith's safety inspectors. We took that information because the inspectors had already been out in the field and assessed the entire system, as he mentioned, so they knew where the broken poles were. So rather than wait until a crew got to the location to discover a pole was broken, we had a pole delivery team deliver the poles ahead of the crews, drop the poles off at the address, so when the crews got to that address, the material items were there and they could start work as quickly as possible. We also worked, excuse me, around the clock 24/7. We had 12 construction line techs and 10 operation line techs working throughout the night, clearing those incidents in our outage management system and helping to bring those outage calls down. We also had some of our customers experience broken weatherheads and damage to our service. You heard Keith mention that our facilities really weren't blown down, they were torn down. So if you can imagine, for overhead services, you have that last pole before that service drop goes to the weatherhead and then down the weatherhead to the meter base. So when a tree falls across that service, a lot of times it pulls the weatherhead over. And what has to happen in those cases, a licensed electrician has to make repairs to the service. Then they would call a city inspector to come out and inspect that service for restoration. So normally what happens in that process, when the inspector is called out and inspects that service and it has met all of the local codes, they would then call OUC, and it would normally take about 5 to 7 days to actually set a meter. Well, we recognized that that process would not work during an emergency and a hurricane situation. So our teams met with the City of Orlando. We got in the room and tried to figure out a good course of action, and we came up with what we called an expedited inspection process. So when the inspectors inspected the service and then called the City of Orlando inspector, instead of calling it into OUC, the city inspector placed a sticker on the meter base. So when our crews got to that location and as part of their restoration, when they saw the sticker on the meter base, they could then go ahead and install the meter right there. So that really cut down on the outage time for a lot of our customers. And I think it's a great example of the partnership between OUC and the City of Orlando, that we can get together and predict an issue and then solve it for the betterment of our community. We also were on daily statewide calls with the governor. I think Clint mentioned that. The governor was very proactive in engaging utility executives around the state. And he really wanted us to know that whatever we needed, whether it was resources, fuel, cots, or whatever the case may be, he was there from his position to support the utilities within the state so that we could help facilitate getting our customers back in service as quickly as possible. And with that, I will turn it over to Stephen Calamusa.
Thanks.
Thank you, Lemoyne. And I'm going to close this out for our OUC presentation. I'm Stephen Calamusa, Senior Communications Coordinator and Social Media Lead during Hurricane Irma. OUC's weathered a lot of storms throughout the years and restored customers quickly and safely each time. But in this new age of communication, as Clint mentioned, Hurricane Irma brought OUC and our customers even more ways to get information. During Hurricane Charlie in 2004, as you'll see on the slide, we had limited options. We had press conferences, TV and radio interviews, the Orlando Sentinel, our call center, and even door-to-door interactions with our customers. Fast forward to today and Hurricane Irma in 2017, we're running a 24-hour operation during a storm of Irma's size. Customers expect prompt, consistent information across all channels. During Hurricane Irma, they could visit ouc.com from their phone, hear messages on our IVR system, read email newsletters, see real-time outage information via our online outage map, and even create dialogue via social media. Self-service options like the outage map and the IVR relieve the call center once we were able to release system and individual reservation times. You'll see that the majority of interactions happened even before these ETRs were released. We certainly know outages are never convenient, but being able to provide a timely ETR really helped manage expectations for our customers and worked really well for them. And of course, our one-on-one interaction with customers is key. This is something that many other utilities didn't do. It's one thing to provide information, but we went really a step further. We opened the door for dialogue through our call center and social media channels and made sure every customer had the ability to talk to us. I skipped them. Here we go. The picture in the bottom of this slide is our communication war room. We have a small digital communications team, but we pulled others from around the commission to work with us 24 hours a day to update messaging to our social media channels, our IVR, and our website in both Spanish and English. And we scaled up a lot for these digital communication efforts. For Irma, we knew social media was absolutely critical to keep our customers informed. The green line you see on the slide shows the interaction on our social media channels. These engagements came in the form of messages, comments, shares, and reactions. And at the end, we saw nearly 3.5 million impressions on our channels. Social media content, as you know, spreads like wildfire, and that's why the right message at the right time with the right tone is imperative. Social media let us engage with customers in two ways, one through proactive content and messaging, and the other through timely customer response. Our proactive outreach came in the form of restoration updates, photos and videos of our crews, as well as tips like generator safety. During the early stages of feeder restoration, we noticed customers getting a little nervous when they didn't see crews in their neighborhoods. So we went into the field and we posted photos and videos of all the work happening and even explained why and how the process happened. It's one thing to say feeder restoration is happening. It's another thing to explain what feeder restoration is and why it's so important to the process. And the second approach was timely response. This engagement let our customers know that we were there and we were listening. Our response team worked 24 hours a day, fielding thousands of customer questions in both English and Spanish. And this went a long way. We received so many positive comments from our customers, thankful for keeping them informed every step of the way. We delivered good news and some bad news, but the important thing was that it was timely and it was relevant, and that meant a lot to them. A newer outlet for us was nextdoor.com. If you're not familiar, this website lets neighbors interact with neighbors and lets us, as OUC, speak directly to our entire service territory or specific neighborhoods. For example, the post you see on the right is from me letting our customers know the status of restoration and explaining the actions that they may need to take as we begin to restore neighborhoods, like weatherhead or meter-based repair, which is their responsibility. Nextdoor is a really great way for us to talk directly to our customers and for them to ask us questions. And it provides a really human touch for OUC. The messaging doesn't just come from OUC, it comes from me, an employee with a name who really wants to provide amazing service. I can even tap into specific neighborhoods and with Nextdoor. So let's say there's a hazard in College Park, I can send a message directly to those residents in College Park. The key for us was working as a unified team. For example, one resident in Audubon Park messaged me frantic because her meter base was locked and her electrician couldn't make repairs. So I asked my team around the table, how can we help this lady? She's really needs our help right now. She was really stuck. So one of my colleagues had the idea to call one of our contractors, Farron, who happened to have a truck in the neighborhood. From that, the lock was removed in about 30 minutes and the lady was permitted and restored that day. These are the types of stories that are really special to OUC. Every employee lucky to work there has one focus, and that's the customer. During and after storms, the thank yous came rolling in, from appreciation for the constant communication to thank yous to the crews. Actually, you see on the slide here, OUC Rocks. This was a banner created by residents on Vassar Street in College Park, and they all signed it and gave it to our crews, which was really cool for us. I think one of my favorites, though, showed how even a small utility like us can make a huge impact around the nation. And my favorite message is up top on this slide from the wife of a line tech that we brought in from Michigan. She said, "I cannot say thank you enough for taking such good care of our guys that were helping you from Michigan. It sure eases my mind as a wife to know my husband and his crew had food, shelter, and clean clothes. Thank you, thank you, thank you." And that is just another way that we consistently live up to our name as OUC, the reliable one. And that's it for our presentation.
Thank you, and the communication was excellent. I got feedback from people who experienced the storm both in the Bay Area and here, and were very complimentary of both the city and OUC versus the communication that was ongoing in other areas of the state. Let's just say I won't call anybody out specifically, but certainly they were getting more high-level information in some areas, like we have more linemen coming, which wasn't particularly helpful if you didn't know when your power was going to come back on. Clint?
I think just in closing, I hope this gives you an overview of really the complexity that's involved. It's very challenging. As I said, each storm is very different and brings its own unique set of challenges. I hope you had a chance to see the depth within this organization to understand. It takes all of us. It takes everyone in the organization. And when you sign on to OUC, you recognize that that point in time may come where you have to serve the community from a restoration standpoint, and we all are part of operations. So I'm incredibly proud of what the entire team has done. ETRs is not easy. There's no perfect science to that. We recognize there are some challenges and potentially some downsides to that. But our heart's in the right spot. We're doing our best to try to inform and communicate with customers. I will tell you that there are some utilities larger than OUC that had no ETR, no system-wide ETR. Didn't even give an indication it's going to be 3 days, 5 days, 7. Some did. And no one in the state broke that one date down and brought it in even closer from what OUC did. So we're proud of that. We continue to try to serve this community in the best way. We will learn again from this storm. We will be better next time, I assure you. Again, and we just want to thank you, and we appreciate the opportunity to serve. I will say if we can continue to work as partners with tree trimming, I know that there are requests that come in through your office. Tree trimming is not easy. That generally comes with a little bit of frustration with consumers. But when it comes storm time, everybody wants their trees trimmed. Everybody wishes that their trees were trimmed. But I will tell you that OUC and the City of Orlando work very well together, especially with planting new trees. We have a campaign. We work aggressively together. I know the City of Orlando has initiatives where they identify trees that need to come down. So I know that you deal with those same challenges. Nobody wants their trees to come down. Nobody wants them trimmed. But as you heard, the storm and the wind does not break the poles. The trees and the infrastructure is where the challenge is. So we need to keep working together, continue to support our tree trimming programs for the betterment of our community. And I thank you and open it up to any questions.
Clint, just before we go to questions, since I have you here, And that's a great example of the country coming to our aid, over 200 unit, or, well, I don't know how many personnel, but.
So as far as the additional resources that we brought in, so we brought in 3.5 times resources, so we had 600 plus resources, line techs, tree trimmers combined.
So they came and helped us, but could you just give us a little report on the efforts when we deployed personnel to Puerto Rico?
Sure. And before I do Puerto Rico, just to make you aware, even during Hurricane Irma, when we had the OUC system back intact, there was another utility in Central Florida, an investor-owned, that asked for our help. And we provided help. We had many of our own employees and family members, live in this Central Florida area and didn't have power, and we thought it was the right thing to do to continue in mutual aid to help during Irma for another, very large utility here in town. In addition to that, as the mayor spoke of, we all know what Puerto Rico went through. They reached out to OUC and a few other utilities in the state and were asking for help. OUC stepped up from a mutual aid standpoint. We sent 14 guys down to Puerto Rico. We flew them down, and then we put all of our vehicles on boats. So I learned quite a few things about that process that we had never experienced before. We had them down there for 30 days. They worked 7 days a week, long, 16-hour days to help the folks of Puerto Rico. So those folks are back home, and back home safely, I'm proud to report. But it was a great, I think, opportunity for OUC in a mutual aid spirit. We know that we could not have been successful in Irma if others would not have come to our aid. It's those type of opportunities that we recognize we need to give back, and that's exactly what we did. Commissioner Ortiz came out and shook the hands of some guys, and as we supported them when they left, and the mayor's been very supportive of that whole thing, and we had the opportunity to meet with the governor of Puerto Rico also. So.
All right, Commissioner Ortiz and Commissioner Ings.
Thank you, Mayor. There's no word to express my gratitude for what you guys did to Puerto Rico, and not only Puerto Rico. Can you guys get any better? I mean, this is outstanding is a huge understatement. Your guys were, in terms of communication, Roseanne, you did such a great job communicating your team, everybody, to our community. You guys couldn't get any faster. You guys were Johnny on the spot. I mean, I was out there many times waiting with families that needed respirators or whatnot, and you guys were fixing things, I mean, one after the other. Accuracy was just, you guys were on point. Efficiency, I mean, I was like, I said, I don't believe this. You guys put, kindly, I'm going to say this very kindly, you guys put everybody else to shame around the nation. You guys were so neat. To the point that if Puerto Rico ever goes private, you guys need to bid on it immediately. Immediately. So I can say thank you enough for what you guys have done. I just have one little question after watching your presentation, and it's something that is a concern after learning through you guys. By the way, I got a chance to meet a lot of your line workers. What a great motivation, all of them. I mean, it was inspirational to just listen to them, talking to them, and whenever you called them, they were, as I said before, Johnny on the spot and motivated. And some of them, I even asked them, I said, you guys mind if I go and get something for you guys to eat? Don't worry, Commissioner, we're already being taken care of. You guys were taking care of everything. I mean, there was so much efficiency in the whole process. So, but you mentioned something that got my attention is in terms of bringing lines underground. And I understand the whole thing cannot be underground because you definitely need to deal with some things above ground. But in terms of that process, and I believe you're up to 60, 65% or something like that.
We are.
Is that something we're going to continue working on to bring more of the system underground?
Yeah, so I think to that point, and first of all, let me just say thank you for those kind words and comments. There are 1,200 employees that stand behind me and the rest of this team. It's a culture at OUC. There is a proud culture to serve this community. When these storms happen, many of us on the administration side, we certainly get a little nervous. But the line tech folks, I mean, they're up for the challenge. They're ready to go serve, and that's their job, and that's what they sign on, and they do a phenomenal job. So thank you for all the kind words. 65% of the OUC system is underground. I will tell you that number continues to grow. From a new construction standpoint, we see that as our standard from a new construction standpoint. Certainly understand the challenges associated with the existing overhead in mature existing neighborhoods with mature existing trees. I will tell you, Commissioner, we've had some conversations with staff. Kevin Edmonds and some of his team, we continue to work together for some solutions between the City of Orlando and OUC to figure out ways to convert existing overhead in existing mature areas. It is a challenge. There's the initial cost. That's a challenge. It's, you know, where do you locate the infrastructure? How do you work in and around the existing trees? And it's not just OUC. There's other telecommunications that are attached to OUC's poles, and there's some additional challenges associated with that. So again, from a new construction standpoint, we will continue to see more underground. From an existing standpoint, we continue to work together to try to come up with some reasonable solutions to work with the community to convert.
Your guys have been awesome in helping us with the Cimarron Corridor, and that's something that hopefully in the future when we have that CRA, we'll be able to to bring to fruition. And I want to take this opportunity to also, you have Andre Burgos and his father. We participated on a motorcycle run this past weekend to raise funds for veterans. So you guys are involved on everything that is out there, also helping the community besides utilities. So very, very proud of you guys. You guys really honor your motto, the reliable and sustainable one. So congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Ings.
Thank you, Mayor Clint. Thank you, and the team for your presentation today. You know, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. You know, I'm hearing all the great stuff that OUC has done during this storm, but in the Washington Shores area, it was about a week and a half that a couple of residents were without power. They didn't get the power restored. And of course, in that Washington Shores area, you have a lot of seniors there. And of course, I was, you know, constantly in contact with your person in the communications center that really helped out a lot. And I can say that for her, she was definitely on target with the timing and the possibilities of the power being restored and that kind of thing. But also in Washington Shores, specifically the Hankins Circle, you'd have some residents on one side of the street that would have power and then the others didn't. And so you know how people feel from that perspective. So it was a real challenging thing, you know, during that time. And just trying to, you know, keep the residents encouraged to know that you guys are trying to do all that you can. And I think some of them had to do with transformers going out and, you know, it'll come on and then it'll go back out for quite a extent of time and stuff. So I just wanted to make sure that you understood that. And if you could possibly share with maybe some other challenges that you had throughout the Orlando area concerning this, if there were any.
So a few comments there. You know, we, you know, Roseanne's team works very hard from a communication standpoint. We certainly recognize that that scenario occurs where one side of the road may have power and the other side does not. That could be, again, just generally how the design of the system, that maybe they, you know, the one side has overhead, rear lot, and that side wasn't impacted. The opposite side of the road, again, rear lot, maybe a tree has taken it down. And so we try to communicate that you know, those scenarios, you know, can exist and do exist. Getting towards the very end of the storm, you heard Lemoyne talk about weatherhead damage. That becomes a little bit of a challenge between OUC's role and responsibility, what the homeowner's role and responsibility is, and then also working with the City of Orlando from an inspector standpoint to make sure weatherhead meter bases are inspected so that they're safely done by an electrician before OUC restores power. And those are certainly some of the challenges towards the end. You know, I think some of the challenges I had mentioned, you know, briefly with the number of people that left the state. trying to get some of these foreign crews in, from our state roadway system. How do we work with first responders, making sure we can identify them as first responders, making sure there may be a mechanism maybe where there's an emergency lane open or what have you, to get those folks in more timely. We do work, and that was certainly a lesson learned from '04 to more recent storms. We will do the best that we can to get resources in prior to. And the best thing we can do is get as many resources on the system as soon as it is safe to be out there. In '04, we were really challenged with trying to call people in, but you lose a day or two. The further you have to go in the Northeast, again, these are large line trucks, generally pulling a utility pole behind it. They're not very fuel efficient, so they have to stop for gas a lot. They can only go 55 miles an hour. There's a lot of congestion on the roads, and you lose key time. And so I think when we showed you some of the efficiency gains from previously in Charlie to now, it's being proactive, getting the resources up front. So, that's one that we're continuing to work with the state. Just making sure mutual aid is a mechanism. The fact that we had an opportunity to help an investor own. I've been a part of chairing a work group that all of the utilities in the state are talking. I will tell you, years ago, we used to generally get in our own little segments. The municipals would work together and talk. The investors will work and talk, and the co-ops also. But we recognize in mutual aid, this is about people. This is about the fundamental services of electric and water. And we have to take all those barriers down. Whether you're an investor-owned muni, we got to take those barriers down. And so, generally, we thought maybe the larger investor-owns, just because they're larger in their resources, would be helping the municipals. We had an opportunity in this scenario to actually help them. But just having those conversations continue so that we're all working together to the mission of serving our customers, or some of the lessons learned, certainly.
Okay. And then also one issue that I was looking at too was the 65% burial rate of lines underground. Now, is there a plan really to go forward to try to get at least 100%, or is there a goal that's somewhere there? Because I think effectively it kind of helps during the time of a storm, especially when less lines are going down because a tree branch or a tree has got into the line, and also with the transformers blowing and that kind of thing. And then just to kind of tag on to that, underground lines, specifically right there at Orange Center and Tampa Street, I call it Spaghetti Alley. Okay. Yeah, because you've got lines up there that just looks horrible, period. And I know the city and OUC have been talking concerning this, and this has been years and years and years, but then there's still no kind of movement or activity concerning that. But can you speak to that issue as well?
Sure, a few points there. As we mentioned, the 65%, we are seeing some growth on that. That primarily is focused on, again, the new growth, increasing that number as we look at new growth going underground. There's no specific number set out for looking at existing infrastructure. I think the opportunity is for, again, the City of Orlando and OUC continuing to look at programs to figure out, are there some mechanisms where we can address the upfront costs, because that really is the challenge. You have existing assets and infrastructure that still have a useful life and still have the bad debt associated to it that we have to continue to pay. We're trying to be mindful of our rates to be the affordable one, as we talk about reliable one, sustainable one. We're trying to be affordable one. But I think if we can continue to talk with the city and look at some mechanisms where maybe that rolls through, a special assessment for that area, and that area is comfortable with buying into that sort of increase or that special assessment. For me, that feels like the vehicle that we can use in some of these areas that are looking to convert from existing overhead to underground. But again, it comes with, again, some challenges. Where do we put that infrastructure? It's currently in the rear lot. It now has to move to the front lot. We have existing trees in the easement. That's where the lines need to go. You have a transformer now that every fourth house, someone has to agree to have the transformer in their front yard. Again, it could impact trees coming out to put that underground infrastructure in the ground, because those trees are there en route. So it's a lot of challenges how to solve that moving forward. But I would encourage that we continue the dialogue with the City of Orlando, see if we can, again, find some vehicles to improve that. As far as the other intersection, I'll look to my team. I'm sure someone's taking some good notes here. We'll look at that intersection. I can't speak specifically to that intersection or some of the previous conversations, but we'll certainly look into that and follow up if that's okay.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Sheehan?
Thank you, Mayor. I just had one thing I want to say is I think y'all should just tell this story because it's a great story, and again through your social media and stuff, because a lot of people don't understand the amount of coordination it takes. And I didn't even realize that y'all are feeding people, doing their laundry. I mean, that's a great story. So I think it's important to get that out there because that way maybe they won't fuss as much. I mean, I know people get angry whenever they don't have power and they're being inconvenienced, but I would like to say too that it really helped out a lot, especially from my neighborhoods, knowing when their power is going to be restored. And I have East Central Park, which was one of the last ones restored. And even though it took a long time, I think they were probably restored on Friday. I think it was maybe just the following Saturday. They appreciated knowing why, and I think that really helps when you can communicate with people, even though it might be bad news.
Right.
And I just had one other thing about the undergrounding. I've had a lot of interest in that in my neighborhoods, Lost Sonifern Creek, the Thornton Park area. But I think another important component to express to people and explain to them is that, yeah, you have to underground the utilities in the right-of-way, and then they're responsible for the connection from their home, just like they're responsible for their weatherhead.
Good point.
They are responsible for the undergrounding on their property to connect to that box. And in an existing home,
right,
that can be pretty substantial if you're having to go under driveways, if you're having to go around trees, and then you have to replace your, where the weatherhead comes in, you might have to replace your panel box. So it could be anywhere from $7,000 to $10,000 for a homeowner to make that investment as well. So it's not just the utility investment, it's also you have to pay a special assessment to the utility. Then you would have to pay for the improvement to your property too. So every time someone comes through and says they want to do this, I've only had one successful application, and everybody's got to agree to pay it. I've only had one successful group, and you have to have 100%. And some of the other homeowners pulled their money and paid for the people that were the holdouts.
Right.
And that was actually, I think, Broadway Court. That's the only one where we've had a successful 100%. Participation in terms of undergrounding. I just like to say too that, again, with 65%, that includes the new construction. It's more difficult to go back and do these neighborhoods. And I'd just like to say thank you too, because like I say, I mean, it's really difficult to restore power. I think Roseanne puts it well. It takes 5 minutes to wipe out 80 years of infrastructure sometimes, and then you all have to go repair it quickly. But again, thank you for everything that you did, and we were kind of lucky that the worst thing we had was power out, especially the amount of damage that Texas and flooding and some of these other folks were having. We were pretty fortunate in comparison. Thank you, Mayor.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay, and Commissioner Stewart.
Mayor, could I just respond to a couple of things? Sure. A couple good comments there, Commissioner Sheehan. One, to make the group aware that through one of the meetings that we had with the city of Orlando, Roseanne and Michelle on your team, we're working on kind of like a informational type packet that does lay out some of the challenges and issues associated with doing it. And so we felt that was a good way to help inform not only you as commissioners, but actually some of the constituents that are asking. Again, it puts things like the service connection to the house, that there's telecommunications that are also a part of this. And so I think the team is putting together a good informational packet that can be shared with everyone. So I appreciate you reminding me of some additional comments that we've had. I think the other thing too, very good comments on just the logistics, and the mayor shared how he got to see it. It's really hard to sort of tell that story. I have a suggestion that I haven't even shared with Roseanne yet, but it really kind of ties into your comments, so I'll throw it out there. But how could we potentially involve some folks from the community that can come over and help be a part of really just serving a meal? It may take to some degree some of the pressure off of our team, but I know there are volunteers out there that would like to shake the hands of some folks. And I think what that may do is that will allow them to then communicate out to the community and say, hey, look what I did tonight. I got to serve some food. I got to meet a lineman from Michigan. Just spread that goodwill, and remind everyone that, we're people, we're working our hardest. It is complex. So again, I'm not sure what Roseanne's doing there yet behind me, but is there a way to get folks in the community involved to just get the goodwill out? So thank you for sharing some of those comments.
Thank you, and thank you for everything y'all have done. Part of the challenge that we all have is that we end up only hearing those few comments from people who are very negative. People who couldn't figure out how to charge their cell phone in their car right there, or the visitor I had from New Jersey that couldn't figure out how to listen to us. And I do appreciate working closely with Roseanne and your staff, because one of the challenges that we saw that was that your outage map needed some work, and nothing better than trying to fix it in real time. But I will tell you that as much as I griped, if you want to call it that, you guys did respond during that time. There was a constant attempt to try to get better each day, especially in terms of communication, especially in terms of the outage side. And that's yeoman's work, and for that I'm deeply grateful. I know that we've got other issues ahead of us, but I want to mention one thing which was important to me, and I'll just share another comment quickly. But one thing was that, and working with our fire, during the midst of all this, I went and tried to find that list of at-risk clients, knowing that they may be out of power, they may need ice, they may need whatever they may be. And I found that our list from our own fire department was not accurate. And then it is difficult to get a list from y'all to do the same thing. And so my point is that there may be some way to be able to coordinate those two together to make sure that's happening. I know that our police department and fire department went out, but I know in the same list that I was looking at, I'll bet you that 25% of the people either weren't there or had since passed away. I felt a little bit uncomfortable because I got what I thought was a current list. So that's an important part, because I think that when you get on social media, you hear the guy who's in a wheelchair that's been without power for 8 days, and that ripples through social media as if there's a lack of performance on your side, when in fact at the moment that you've restored 97% of the rest of the city, and they don't see it that way. So I deeply appreciate working with y'all, working with those issues, because I think it was important to get that information out. The last is hurricane preparedness is coming up on
Yes.
June 1. It's only a few months away. Doesn't
Yes.
seem like it, does it? And following the same comment with Commissioner Sheehan, there may be some opportunity now to take some of these stories, share some things that we've learned, and trying to get with especially the news media as you enter in April and May, to be able to tell the story, and tell not only the story of what we did well, but what more citizen involvement will be. I promise you our community will be better prepared this June than they were last June. Especially those who went through it. But at the same time, we want to make sure that they know there's other tools that are available for them, and you're reliable enough that people don't, when something happens, that's when they have to go after it. Other things that I think I mentioned to you is that on inline transformers and those kind of things, the biggest challenge that we have with transformers outside of the regular work is squirrels. And animals. So when you add trees to that, it makes it much worse. And so I'd appreciate you guys looking at the new technology for some of that, even in overland, and poles having inline transformers to avoid that same kind of issue where one unit goes out and all of a sudden you're stuck. But I so much appreciate the work that y'all have done. I know that you're working with Byron to make sure that we are doing an analysis of ours involvement as well as with y'all's too. So thank you very much. Thank you, and congratulations on your new role. Look forward to working with you, and thank you for all of y'all, especially, I won't point you out individually, but especially Roseanne, because Roseanne was the one I called. and you did a great job, Roseanne. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
I will just say, again, thank you for the comments. Commissioner Ortiz talked about how are we going to get better. It's that feedback that we need. You mentioned the outage map. I would like to give the board an update. We do have a new outage map. So we recognize there was an opportunity for us that we were working on that plan to update the outage map. So we have a new outage map. It has some new features and tools. We also have what we call proactive alerts. It's an opportunity where customers can elect to sign up and they can receive feedback that there is an outage and what the ETR is. Where maybe the current model is you may have to go look online, look at the map, or you may actually call in to the IVR. You can actually sign up and we'll push information to you to inform you. We've just recently, Roseanne's team, have done a very soft launch, and we've had really high participation. And so we want to do a soft launch by design, make sure we have everything perfectly worked out, and very soon we'll go aggressively and market it, especially in time with the new storm season or the storm season coming up. We want to get as many people to sign up for that type of program as we can. So we're continuing to try to get information, share information, with our customers. So thanks again for the feedback.
Great, thanks. So let me just close with one thing. At City Council today, we'll be renewing our fire department's ISO rating, and we are one of the few fire departments in the entire country that has an ISO rating of 1. We've had that for, Chief, 8 years, 10 years? 10 years. 10 years. But help me here, 40% of the water supply? Yes, 40%. Okay, so a lot of people wouldn't realize, but 40% of the rating relates to the water supply. So OUC's maintenance and operation of our water system plays a large part in our ISO rating of 1 with the fire department. So thank you for that as well.
Mayor, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I have a last question since we announced the partnership now with OUC in terms of the City Hall and the fire departments being sustainable and depending on solar energy. How that affects in terms of when we have a storm, would the power then would not run the risk of being interrupted like it would be if it was tied up to a line system? I mean, tell me more about that. I guess it's still tied up to a line system, but how that works, is it more reliable in terms of not losing power?
From a fire department standpoint, or just as general consumer?
From general.
From a general consumer, I think it's just another form of, a backup generation. Whether they have a traditional backup generator, that takes gasoline, or maybe they've piped in a permanent one with propane or natural gas. As long as the sun is out, obviously, depending on how much PV they install for the house, whether that's a whole house system, whether that maybe is for the hot water heater or for a few outlets, but it is an alternative, all right, for customers. That's just another form of a generating asset, as long as the solar panels are not damaged. Long as the sun is still out, it can certainly be a mechanism for customers.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Clint. Thank you, OUC team, and thanks for coming over and doing the presentation.
Thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
All right, we will stand adjourned in terms of our public hearing. Okay, we still have another meeting, so we're going to move into our January 22nd, 2018 agenda review meeting. Do we have any cards? Is there anyone from the public that wants to speak on a consent agenda item? Okay, then just before we go through the commissioners, I just wanted to let you know there's a new business item that is Ford Keeney donating the Rogers building to the city that's under new business, and if there's no objection, I would like to move that item to hear it right after Ward's presentations and before the mayor's update, so that Ford can be here and not be here for a long part of the meeting, if that's okay with everybody. All right, Commissioner Tony Ortiz.
Oh my God, I'm starting today. I don't have much, Mayor. I'm going to be voting no on hearings first read ordinance number 1. That's it. That's all I have.
Okay, Commissioner Stewart.
I have nothing, Mayor, except that are we on the home sharing, the short-term rental, will there be a presentation on that, or right now, are we going to want to get through the first reading?
Do you have a presentation on that, Byron? I don't even know. Yes. We'll create one in the next
I mean,
hour.
and it's okay to do it second time in case there's changes that need to come forward, but I think we need to have something kind of
Okay, we can do it.
electronically we can share with
Quick
people,
overview
know
on
what it is.
Okay. Is that
That's
it?
it. I'm sorry, that's it, Mayor.
Commissioner Sheehan?
Yeah, I had a couple things on the Rogers Building. I saw that it was 20 years as a cultural facility. Is there some reason they picked that number out? Because it's a very generous donation, and I think it's important to keep these cultural facilities as such, especially since that's the way that Mr. Keeney is donating it very generously. And I just like to make sure that it's more than 20 years, that we don't sell it off or something like that. Okay, you briefed me on that? Okay. And then I did have some concerns on hearings ordinance first reading on the short-term rentals. I was able to talk to some of my neighborhoods about this because it had passed MPB a while back, but there were some concerns about this. Can we go back to the original code if something happens? Because right now we do have a prohibition on them, and we can restrict them. And the concern is that if there's some kind of a overreach by the legislature, which happens quite frequently, that they always try to take away our home rule, if we institute this, will this put us in jeopardy of losing any existing regulations because they might preempt us?
Commissioner, why don't we discuss that?
You do that later? Okay, that's fine. Okay. And additionally, just in case, Kyle, in case, just some issues, the Los Ona Fern Creek Historic District has a restriction on commercial activity in their ordinance, and I don't know if that would be applicable here, but I just want to, so he's got time to deal with the questions specifically that came from my neighborhoods, and I don't surprise him. Okay?
That's great.
That's all I had. Thank you, Mayor.
Commissioner Ings?
Thank you, Mayor. Under item A1, the Solar Energy Innovation Network Grant, the group members, they're really great, great resumes and everything, but it doesn't include an African-American member as part of this particular group. And I just wanted to find out if there were any efforts to include an African-American, specifically as a seventh member, not necessarily trying to take someone off to include, but I think that the process is already going, so it may be difficult to do that, but if I can get some explanation on that, that'll help me a lot. And then under item B4, the use of Polk County contract with the ISI Water Company. Specifically, were there any MWBE companies that can compete for a contract of this nature if it was listed? And what I'm looking at is it's a piggyback contract without any further research on the lack of a MWBE company is just not good enough. And I just like for the MWBE office to go into a little bit more detail of their research and just giving me a blanket statement. Then the other aspect of the WCA Water Company of America, in this particular piggyback contract, only contracted to review billing issues for water, wastewater, and the fire line meters for this missing of billing information. They indicated, the company indicated that they dealt with solid waste billing issues, but that's not what's in the RFP that was put out for the use of the Polk County contract. It was just dealing with water issues. So this piggyback contract really doesn't show any details of how they will deal with billing issues concerning solid waste. And so because of that lack of that information, it's like we're going with the piggyback contract that's dealing with one issue, and we're asking about another issue, and I don't see any real comparison that this this company WCA, can do this other work as it relates with solid waste billings. So if there is no other information on that, I just want you to know that I will be voting no on this particular item, and actually it should be pulled so we can get some more information on that, because we're looking at an apple and orange situation concerning jumping on a piggyback contract. And all of the reviews from other companies that were involved with this organization gave some great reviews of how they dealt with water meters, etc. But there are no reviews about solid waste billing issues. That's all. That was a lot.
Okay,
Man.
yeah, okay.
That was a lot of reading.
Commissioner Gray?
I'm fine, sir, thank you.
Okay, then we'll convene at 2 o'clock.